In the quiet suburban town of Willow Creek, nothing ever really happened. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where neighbors waved from across manicured lawns, and where crime was something that happened somewhere else, on the evening news, in big cities with names that sounded dangerous. Willow Creek was safe, predictable, forgettable. And Daniel Harper fit perfectly into that picture. At 39 years old, Daniel was everything a community like Willow Creek admired. He worked as a financial compliance officer for a regional insurance firm downtown. His job sounded boring, because it was. He wore pressed shirts, drove a sensible gray sedan, and never missed a mortgage payment. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., Daniel jogged the same route through the neighborhood. He waved at Mrs. Klein while she watered her roses. He nodded at Officer Ramirez, who lived 2 houses down. He returned home, showered, kissed his wife Emily on the cheek, and left for work with a travel mug of black coffee. Emily often told friends how lucky she was. "Daniel's steady," she'd say. "Not exciting, but solid. You know exactly who he is." And that was the thing. Everyone thought they did. Daniel and Emily had been married for 12 years. They had no children, not because they didn't want them, but because life had simply gone a different direction. Instead, they filled their home with routines. Sunday grocery shopping. Friday movie nights. Occasional dinner parties with neighbors where Daniel grilled steaks and talked about interest rates and home values. He was polite, mild-mannered, invisible in the safest way possible. No one ever saw him angry. No one ever heard him raise his voice. No one ever suspected anything. It was a Tuesday in early October when the first crack appeared. Emily came home later than usual that night. The marketing firm she worked for was preparing a major pitch, and deadlines had swallowed her entire day. When she pulled into the driveway just after 9 p.m., Daniel's car was already there. That was unusual. Daniel never left work early. Inside, the house was dark except for the glow of the living room lamp. Daniel sat on the couch, hands folded, staring at nothing. The television was off. "You okay?" Emily asked, setting down her bag. Daniel looked up slowly, as if waking from a dream. "Long day," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. Emily noticed little things she couldn't quite explain. The way his jaw tightened when she asked about dinner. The way he flinched when his phone vibrated on the coffee table. Later that night, when Emily rolled over in bed, Daniel wasn't asleep. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling. "Can't sleep," she whispered. "Just thinking," he replied. About what, she wondered. But she didn't ask. 3 days later, a woman named Rachel Moore failed to show up for work. Rachel was 32, recently divorced, and new to Willow Creek. She worked at a boutique fitness studio on the edge of town and rented a small apartment just a mile from Daniel and Emily's house. When she didn't arrive for her morning class, her manager assumed she was sick. When she didn't answer texts by afternoon, concern began to grow. By evening, Rachel's sister, who lived in another state, called the local police department to request a welfare check. Officer Ramirez was assigned the call. Rachel's apartment door was locked. No sign of struggle. Her car sat in its assigned parking spot. Her phone, purse, and wallet were gone. It was odd. But not alarming. People disappeared sometimes. Adults were allowed to do that. The report was filed. A note was added to the system. Life in Willow Creek continued. Including Daniel's. What no one knew was that Daniel Harper lived by routines that extended far beyond jogging paths and grocery lists. Every night, after Emily went to sleep, Daniel slipped out of bed and walked into the home office. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. With a key he wore on a chain around his neck. Inside was a second phone. It had no contacts saved by name. Only numbers. Daniel scrolled through them carefully, stopping on one. A message thread stared back at him. Unknown, are you sure this is safe? Daniel, I've done this before. Unknown, you promised this was the last time. Daniel, I promise. He locked the drawer, returned to bed, and lay awake until morning. 2 weeks after Rachel Moore disappeared, her sister officially reported her missing. That changed everything. Detectives from the county sheriff's office arrived in Willow Creek. They canvassed neighborhoods. They knocked on doors. They asked polite questions. Daniel answered his door with a friendly smile. Yes, I saw the flyers, he said. Terrible thing. Poor woman. Did you know her? Detective Laura Bennett asked. Not personally, Daniel replied without hesitation. I might have seen her around. Small town. Bennett studied him for a moment longer than necessary. There was nothing wrong with Daniel Harper. And yet, something about him didn't sit quite right. That night, Emily noticed something else. Daniel washed his clothes separately. He always had, but tonight, he insisted on running the machine twice. Did you spill something? She asked casually. Just being thorough, he said. Emily shrugged it off. But later, as the washer drained, a faint reddish tint swirled briefly before disappearing. Emily told herself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. What Detective Bennett didn't know was that Daniel Harper had been on her radar before. Years ago. In another city. Another state. A case that never went anywhere. A missing woman. No body. No evidence. Just a name buried deep in an old file. A name that matched Daniel's. But people moved on. And so did Daniel. Or so everyone believed. Daniel Harper lived a normal life. A respected job. A loving wife. A quiet neighborhood. But somewhere beneath that carefully constructed routine, a secret waited, patiently, for the moment it would finally be uncovered. And when it was, nothing in Willow Creek would ever feel safe again. Detective Laura Bennett had learned, over years of working missing person cases, that the most dangerous assumption was believing that nothing was wrong. Rachel Moore's disappearance didn't scream violence. No broken locks. No blood. No frantic calls to friends. But that, in itself, unsettled Bennett. People rarely vanished without leaving something behind. Rachel's phone activity had stopped abruptly at 9:42 p.m. on a Friday night. Her bank card hadn't been used since. Her social media accounts went silent. It was as if she had stepped out of her life and never stepped back in. Bennett spread photos across her desk, security stills from nearby streets, gym check-in logs, traffic camera captures. She circled one image repeatedly, a blurry shot of a gray sedan turning off Maple Drive around 9:30 p.m. A common car. A forgettable car. The kind of car people never remembered. Daniel Harper woke before his alarm. He always did after nights like that. Emily slept beside him, her breathing steady, unaware of the storm of thoughts tearing through his mind. Daniel lay still, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, replaying every detail, what he'd said, what he hadn't said, what could go wrong. He slipped out of bed and showered longer than usual, scrubbing his hands until his skin reddened. He dressed carefully, choosing a shirt with sleeves long enough to cover a faint scratch along his forearm. In the mirror, he practiced his face. Neutral. Calm. Normal. At work, Daniel performed flawlessly. Numbers balanced. Emails answered. Meetings attended. He even joked with a coworker about weekend plans. No one suspected the quiet man at the conference table was counting down hours. Back at the sheriff's office, Detective Bennett requested archived records from another state, an informal hunch she couldn't explain. The response came late in the afternoon. Case file, missing person, Hannah Klein. Status, unresolved. Last seen, 2014. The file was thin. Too thin. Hannah Klein had vanished after meeting someone she'd connected with online. No forced entry. No witnesses. No suspect ever charged. But one name appeared repeatedly in the interview notes. Daniel Harper. Coworker acquaintance. Interviewed twice. Alibi, confirmed. Cleared. Bennett leaned back in her chair. People didn't usually reappear in missing person cases without reason. Emily Harper had always trusted her husband. Trust was easy when nothing seemed wrong. But lately, small inconsistencies crept into their life like dust settling on forgotten furniture. Daniel's phone never left his side. He started locking the bathroom door. He insisted on handling trash disposal himself, always late at night. One evening, as Emily folded laundry, she found a receipt tucked inside Daniel's jacket pocket. A gas station purchase. Across town. At 10:03 p.m. Daniel had told her he was working late that night. Emily stared at the slip of paper longer than necessary, her stomach tightening. When Daniel came home, she mentioned it casually. "Oh, that," he said smoothly. "I forgot. Had to run an errand after work." The explanation made sense. Too much sense. Detective Bennett returned to Daniel Harper's home under the guise of routine follow-up. Daniel welcomed her in, offering coffee. His posture was relaxed, his smile measured. "Still no updates?" he asked politely. "Not yet," Bennett replied, watching him carefully. "I just have a few more questions." She asked about his schedule. His routine. His whereabouts the night Rachel Moore disappeared. Daniel answered without hesitation. "I was home," he said. "My wife can confirm." Emily nodded, though something in her expression flickered. Bennett noticed. People rarely lied with words. They lied with timing. With over-prepared answers. with certainty that arrived too fast. As Bennett stood to leave, her eyes drifted toward the closed door of Daniel's home office. "Do you work from home often?" she asked. "Sometimes," Daniel said. "Mostly paperwork." Bennett smiled. "I may need to come back with a few more questions," she said lightly. "Anytime," Daniel replied. But after she left, Daniel locked the door behind her and stood motionless for several minutes, his heart pounding. That night, Daniel didn't go to bed. He waited until Emily was asleep, then retrieved the second phone from his desk drawer. His fingers hovered over the screen before dialing a number. No answer. He pulled on a jacket, grabbed his keys, and drove across town to a storage facility just off the highway. The unit was small, paid in cash, registered under a fake name. Inside, everything was meticulously organized. Plastic bins. Labels. A locked metal box. Daniel knelt in front of it, checking that the padlock was secure. He exhaled slowly, reassuring himself that everything was still where it belonged. No one knew about this place. No one ever had. When Emily woke at 2:14 a.m., Daniel wasn't beside her. She waited. Listened. The house was silent. When Daniel finally returned, she pretended to sleep. She felt the mattress dip, smelled cold air clinging to his clothes. The next morning, she watched him leave for work and felt something she had never felt before. Fear. Not of him doing something wrong, but of not knowing who he was at all. Detective Bennett requested cell tower pings tied to Rachel Moore's last known location. One device appeared repeatedly in the area that night. A gray sedan owner. A resident of Willow Creek. A man with no criminal record. A man everyone trusted. Daniel Harper. Bennett stared at the data and whispered to herself, "There you are." The walls were closing in. Emily felt it. Detective Bennett saw it. And Daniel Harper knew it. Because the life he had built so carefully was beginning to crack, and buried beneath it was a secret that could no longer stay hidden. Detective Laura Bennett didn't rush. Rushing ruined cases. Instead, she let the evidence breathe. She ordered discreet surveillance on Daniel Harper, not enough to alert him, but enough to notice patterns. 2 unmarked vehicles rotated shifts outside his workplace. Another sat parked half a block from his house, blending into the quiet rhythm of Willow Creek. Within 48 hours, something stood out. Daniel Harper was careful. He followed traffic laws obsessively. He avoided cameras. He never lingered in one place too long unless he had a reason that looked innocent: groceries, gas, work meetings. But once every few nights, he drove without purpose. No destination that made sense. Just movement. Daniel felt it before he saw it. That prickle at the back of his neck. The sensation that air itself had turned heavy. At a red light downtown, he checked his mirrors. A dark SUV sat behind him. 2 turns later, it was still there. When he pulled into a pharmacy parking lot, the SUV slowed, then continued past. Coincidence, he told himself. It had to be. But Daniel had lived with secrets long enough to recognize danger. He adjusted immediately, changed routes, altered schedules, avoided his storage unit entirely. What he didn't know was that every change only confirmed Bennett's suspicions. Emily Harper couldn't sleep anymore. At night, she lay awake listening to Daniel breathe, wondering what version of her husband existed when she wasn't watching. The man she married had never made her feel small. Never made her doubt. Now, every silence felt deliberate. One evening, as they ate dinner in near quiet, Emily finally spoke. "Are you hiding something from me?" Daniel's fork paused mid-air. "No," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Why would you think that?" "You're different," she said. "You disappear. You lie about small things. I don't recognize you lately." Daniel forced a smile. "You're stressed." "We both are." Emily nodded, but the answer didn't settle her. Later that night, she did something she had never done before. She went into Daniel's home office. The office smelled faintly of metal and dust. Emily opened drawers slowly, half hoping she'd find nothing at all. Then she found the locked one. The key wasn't hard to locate, it hung on a chain Daniel never removed. Her hands shook as she unlocked the drawer. Inside was the second phone. Emily stared at it, her heart pounding. She turned it on. No names. No photos. Just messages. And one conversation that made her knees buckle. "Unknown, you said she wouldn't fight." "Daniel, she didn't at first." "Unknown, then what happened?" "Daniel, it ended the same way as before." Emily dropped the phone like it burned. She backed out of the room, her mind screaming for logic, an explanation that would make those words harmless. But there wasn't one. Detective Bennett finally received permission to reopen the Hannah Klein case. She flew out to review the original evidence in person. The details mirrored Rachel Moore's disappearance almost perfectly. Same calm lead-up, same sudden silence, same lack of physical evidence. But one thing had changed. Technology. Cell data from 2014 was crude. But when combined with modern mapping software, a pattern emerged. Hannah's last known location intersected with a stretch of highway near a rural storage facility. Bennett pulled up the address. Same company. Same chain. Different state. Her chest tightened. This wasn't coincidence. This was repetition. Under pressure, even the most controlled people slipped. Daniel slipped on a Thursday night. He drove to the storage facility. He told himself it was necessary, one last check, one last reassurance. He didn't see the unmarked car parked near the entrance. He didn't notice the camera mounted above the gate. Detective Bennett watched the live feed from her laptop as Daniel unlocked Unit 317. "Got you," she whispered. Emily didn't confront Daniel. She didn't scream or accuse or demand answers. She called the police. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but her words were clear. "My husband has another phone," she said. "And I think it's connected to a missing woman." Detective Bennett closed her eyes for a brief moment. Then she stood up. "It's time," she said. The warrant was signed within hours. Daniel Harper was at work when deputies arrived at the storage facility. Inside Unit 317, investigators found what Daniel had worked so hard to keep hidden. Personal belongings. Jewelry. A folded jacket with a boutique gym logo stitched on the sleeve. Rachel Moore's. In a sealed metal box beneath plastic bins, they found something worse. Photographs. Printed. Organized. Dated. Women who had trusted him. Women who had vanished. Daniel Harper's normal life was officially over. The police had his secret. Emily had his truth. And the story Willow Creek told itself about safety would never be the same again. Daniel Harper was halfway through reviewing a quarterly report when two uniformed deputies appeared at his office door. At first, no one panicked. Police visited businesses all the time, paperwork issues, parking complaints, routine matters. Daniel looked up calmly, already preparing a polite smile. "Daniel Harper?" one deputy asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Sir, please stand up." The room went silent. Co-workers watched as Daniel slowly rose from his chair, confusion carefully etched across his face. "What's this about?" he asked. The deputy didn't answer. He placed Daniel's hands behind his back and snapped on the cuffs. Daniel didn't resist. But as he was led past stunned co-workers, his eyes darkened, not with fear, but with calculation. Emily Harper sat alone in a small interview room at the sheriff's office. She clutched a paper cup of water she hadn't touched. Emily Harper sat alone in a small interview room at the sheriff's office. When Detective Bennett entered, Emily looked up with red, hollow eyes. "I didn't want to believe it," Emily said quietly. "I kept telling myself I was wrong." Bennett listened as Emily explained everything: the second phone, the messages, the lies, the nights Daniel disappeared. "Did he ever hurt you?" Bennett asked gently. Emily shook her head. "No. That's what scares me most. He was perfect." Bennett nodded. She had heard that word many times before. Daniel sat across from Detective Bennett, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. The camera light blinked red. "You know why you're here," Bennett said. Daniel smiled faintly. "I assume there's been some kind of misunderstanding." Bennett slid a photograph across the table. Rachel Moore's jacket. Daniel glanced at it briefly, then leaned back. "I've never seen that before." Bennett slid another photo. The storage unit. Daniel's smile faded, just slightly. "That unit isn't mine," he said. Bennett leaned forward. "We have surveillance footage. Fingerprints. A lease agreement paid in cash. And your wife turned over a phone full of messages." For the first time, Daniel's composure cracked. Not panic. Annoyance. Hours passed. Daniel denied everything. He spoke calmly, carefully, choosing each word like a chess move. He blamed misunderstandings. Claimed the phone was planted. Suggested his wife was emotionally unstable. Bennett recognized the tactic. Control through doubt. "Where is Rachel Moore?" she asked directly. Daniel met her gaze. "I don't know." "Where is Hannah Klein?" Silence. A long one. Daniel looked down at the table, then back up. "I want a lawyer." While Daniel sat in custody, forensic teams worked through the night. The storage unit told a story Daniel could no longer control. They found burner phones dating back years. Maps with hand-drawn routes. A notebook filled with dates, initials, and coded phrases. One phrase appeared repeatedly. "Compliance achieved." Bennett stared at the words. Daniel hadn't seen himself as violent. He had seen himself as organized. A breakthrough came just before dawn. One of the maps matched a remote wooded area outside town, land scheduled for development but currently abandoned. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in quietly. The soil told the truth. Deputies began to dig. In his holding cell, Daniel watched the local news broadcast on a mounted television. The anchor spoke carefully. "Authorities have discovered evidence connected to the disappearance of Rachel Moore." Daniel's jaw tightened. For the first time, fear reached his eyes. Because he knew what they would find. And he knew once they did, there would be no more control. Just after sunrise, investigators uncovered remains wrapped in industrial plastic. A bracelet still circled one wrist. Rachel Moore's sister identified it within minutes. Detective Bennett closed her eyes. Then she ordered the search expanded. Just after sunrise, investigators uncovered remains wrapped in industrial plastic. A bracelet still circled one wrist. Rachel Moore's sister identified it within minutes. Detective Bennett closed her eyes. Then she ordered the search expanded. Daniel Harper had lived a normal life for years. But beneath the surface, his secret had grown too large to hide. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. The silence was broken. And now, the question was no longer if Daniel would be exposed, but how many lives his secret had already destroyed. Daniel Harper had always believed control was permanent. In the holding cell, he learned how fragile it really was. The news cycle moved faster than he expected. By noon, every major local outlet carried his name. By evening, national networks were calling it the Willow Creek case. Reporters camped outside the sheriff's office. Neighbors who once waved at Daniel now avoided his house entirely. Daniel sat on the narrow bench, hands folded, eyes fixed on the wall. He wasn't thinking about guilt. He was thinking about exposure. Rachel Moore's autopsy confirmed what detectives already feared. Cause of death, asphyxiation. Manner of death, homicide. No excessive injuries. No chaos. Controlled. Methodical. Dr. Evelyn Shore, the medical examiner, pointed out marks on Rachel's wrists, faint, consistent with restraint. There was no evidence of prolonged struggle. She trusted whoever did this, Shore said quietly. Detective Bennett didn't need clarification. Emily Harper stopped leaving the house. Friends called. Family texted. She didn't answer. She sat in the living room, staring at a space on the wall where Daniel's framed degrees once hung. She had taken them down the night he was arrested. She replayed every memory, the smiles, the routines, the calm. How did I miss it? She whispered to herself. When Detective Bennett visited again, Emily looked older than her years. I want to help, Emily said. However I can. Bennett nodded. Then tell me everything. Even the things that didn't make sense at the time. Emily did. And slowly, a clearer picture formed. Detectives laid everything out on a large evidence board. Photos. Dates. Locations. Every woman fit a pattern. Recently separated. New to town. Limited social circle. Financially stable enough to live alone. Emotionally vulnerable, but outwardly independent. Daniel didn't hunt randomly. He selected. He didn't want chaos, Bennett said. He wanted compliance. The word from Daniel's notebook echoed through the room. Daniel met his attorney for the first time late that afternoon. A seasoned defense lawyer. Sharp. Direct. They have a body, the attorney said. They have evidence. This is no longer a misunderstanding. Daniel leaned forward. You can still control the narrative. The attorney studied him. This isn't about narrative anymore. It's about damage control. That was the moment Daniel's calm finally shattered. He slammed his fist against the table. They were willing, he hissed. Every one of them. The attorney said nothing. He didn't have to. Using Daniel's maps and GPS data from the second phone, investigators identified 2 more locations. Remote. Hidden. Quiet. The first site yielded nothing. The second did. By nightfall, they had uncovered remains consistent with Hannah Klein. 8 years after she disappeared. The case that had once gone cold now burned with clarity. Willow Creek held a town meeting. Residents packed the community center, voices shaking with anger and disbelief. "That man lived next to us," someone shouted. "Our kids played on that street," another cried. Officer Ramirez stood in the back, head lowered. He had waved at Daniel Harper every morning. Detective Bennett sat across from Daniel once more. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply laid photographs on the table. Rachel. Hannah. 2 others, still unidentified. Daniel stared at them in silence. "You can stop this," Bennett said softly. "You can tell us where they are." Daniel's eyes filled with something unfamiliar. Not remorse. Relief. "I kept everything organized," he said quietly. "I didn't want mistakes." Bennett held her composure, though her stomach turned. The myth of Daniel Harper was gone. In its place stood a man exposed by his own need for control. The dead were beginning to speak. The pattern was undeniable. And the truth, far darker than anyone imagined, was still unfolding. Daniel Harper didn't confess all at once. He released the truth the way he had lived his life, slowly, deliberately, and only when it benefited him. Detective Laura Bennett sat across from him again, a single recorder on the table. No photos this time. No accusations. Just silence. After nearly 10 minutes, Daniel spoke. "I never wanted it to get out of control," he said. Bennett didn't interrupt. "They came to me," Daniel continued. "They needed help. Guidance. Stability." His voice was steady, almost instructional. "What kind of help?" Bennett asked. Daniel folded his hands. Structure. Daniel traced it back to years earlier, long before Willow Creek. He had volunteered to mentor new hires at his old firm. Women going through divorces. Relocations. Emotional upheaval. "I was good at listening," he said. "People open up when you make them feel safe." That was his entry point. He never rushed. Never forced. He waited until trust was absolute. According to Daniel, the first death wasn't planned. Hannah Klein had panicked. "She wanted to leave," he said. "She threatened to expose me." Bennett's jaw tightened. "I couldn't let disorder ruin everything," Daniel continued calmly. "I restrained her. She stopped breathing faster than I expected." He looked almost offended by the inconvenience. "I learned from that." Daniel described his methods without emotion. He selected women who wouldn't be immediately missed. He staged his interactions to look consensual. He documented everything, not for pleasure, but for precision. The photographs weren't trophies. They were records. "I needed to make sure I didn't repeat mistakes," he said. Bennett had interrogated violent offenders before, but this was different. Daniel didn't see himself as cruel. He saw himself as efficient. Emily was informed of Daniel's partial confession by phone. She sat on the floor of her bedroom, the walls closing in. He said it was an accident, she whispered. Bennett's voice was firm. It wasn't. Emily covered her mouth as sobs broke free, not just for the victims, but for the realization that her entire marriage had been a lie built on performance. Daniel eventually gave up the rest of the sites. 3 more. Each one verified. Each one devastating. By the end of the week, investigators had connected Daniel Harper to 5 victims across 2 states. And Bennett suspected there were more. During a routine review of Daniel's notebooks, a forensic analyst noticed something disturbing. The dates weren't random. They aligned with moments of stress in Daniel's life, job evaluations, arguments with Emily, financial audits. Daniel didn't kill out of desire. He killed to restore balance. To feel calm again. The district attorney reviewed the evidence and made a rare call. No plea deal. No negotiations. This isn't about winning, the prosecutor said. It's about showing exactly who he is. Daniel Harper would face trial. And everything he had hidden would be exposed under oath. That night, alone in his cell, Daniel stared at his reflection in the steel mirror. For the first time, there was no audience. No one to manage. No version of himself to perform. His breathing slowed. Not with regret. But with the unsettling calm of a man who believed his work was finally understood. The confession shattered the illusion of accident. Daniel Harper wasn't impulsive. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't lost. He was deliberate. And as the trial approached, the nation would be forced to confront a terrifying truth. Evil doesn't always look monstrous. Sometimes, it looks organized. The courthouse in Willow Creek had never seen crowds like this. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Reporters filled the steps before sunrise. True crime bloggers live-streamed every detail, speculating about motive, psychology, and punishment. When Daniel Harper was brought into the courtroom, the noise faded. He wore a plain suit. No cuffs visible. His hair was neatly combed. He looked like a man attending a business meeting. That image alone unsettled everyone watching. The lead prosecutor stood and spoke slowly. "This is not a case about rage," she said. "It is not about loss of control. It is about a man who built a system to dominate others, and hid it behind the mask of normal life." Jurors listened intently as she laid out the timeline. The disappearances. The storage units. The notebooks. The remains. Daniel watched without reaction. Emily Harper entered the courtroom and froze when she saw Daniel. For 12 years. That face had meant safety. Now it meant deception. She swore the oath and sat down, her hands trembling. "Did you ever suspect your husband was involved in these crimes?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Emily said, her voice breaking. "He was kind. He was patient. He was everything he needed to be." Daniel stared straight ahead. Emily described the second phone. The messages. The night she realized her husband was a stranger. Several jurors wiped their eyes. Daniel did not move. Psychologists testified next. They described Daniel as highly organized, emotionally detached, and motivated by control rather than impulse. One expert used a phrase that rippled through the courtroom. Functional predator. Someone in the gallery gasped. Daniel's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Then came the photographs. Not shown to the public. Not shown to the families. Only to the jury. Each image was described, not displayed. Dates. Locations. Patterns. Daniel's notes. Compliance achieved. Jurors avoided looking at him. It happened on the fourth day of testimony. A forensic analyst described how Rachel Moore's bracelet had been recovered, still intact, still recognizable. Daniel's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists. The courtroom noticed. The prosecutor paused. This bracelet, she said, holding up an evidence bag, was identified by Rachel's sister. That was when Daniel spoke. That's enough. Gasps filled the room. The judge warned him to remain silent. Daniel leaned forward, his calm cracking. You're misrepresenting it, he snapped. She wasn't afraid. The outburst stunned everyone. The mask had slipped. Daniel's attorney attempted a strategy built on doubt. No direct eyewitnesses. Confessions given under pressure. Mental health mitigation. But every argument collapsed under the weight of consistency. Too many sites. Too many records. Too much planning. This wasn't confusion. It was design. In her final statement, the prosecutor didn't raise her voice. Daniel Harper lived among us, she said. He attended dinners. He waved to neighbors. He slept beside his wife. She turned toward the jury. And while doing all of that, he decided who deserved control, and who didn't deserve to live. Daniel stared straight ahead. Still. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the courtroom stood. Guilty, the foreperson said. On all counts. Emily closed her eyes. Families wept. Daniel exhaled slowly. The verdict brought justice, but not closure. Because for the first time, Daniel Harper no longer had control. And the question haunting everyone was no longer what he had done, but why a man so ordinary chose to become something so calculatedly evil. The courtroom was quieter than it had been during the trial. No cameras this time. No arguments. No strategy. Only consequences. Daniel Harper sat at the defense table, hands folded, eyes forward. The confident posture was still there, but it looked practiced now, like a habit he couldn't break even when it no longer mattered. The judge entered, and everyone rose. This court is now in session. Victim impact statements came first. Rachel Moore's sister stood, gripping the podium so tightly her knuckles turned white. My sister trusted people, she said. She believed kindness was safety. And you used that against her. Her voice broke, but she continued. You didn't just take her life. You erased her future. Daniel did not look at her. Hannah Klein's parents followed. Their words were quieter. Heavier. We spent 8 years hoping she'd walk through the door, her mother said. Every phone call. Every knock. We kept hoping. Daniel's eyes flickered. Just once. Emily Harper was the last to speak. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She looked directly at Daniel. "I loved a man who never existed," she said. "You stole my life too. And I'll spend the rest of it learning what was real." Daniel swallowed. It was the most emotion he had shown since his arrest. The judge reviewed the charges carefully. 5 counts of first-degree murder. Multiple counts of unlawful restraint. Concealment of remains. Interstate criminal conduct. "Mr. Harper," the judge said, "you present one of the clearest examples of premeditation this court has ever seen." Daniel stood. "You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison," the judge continued, "without the possibility of parole." No reaction. No protest. Just a slow exhale. The case dominated headlines for weeks. The man next door. A killer hidden in plain sight. How normal became deadly. Experts debated endlessly. Was he born this way? Was it learned? Could he have been stopped? The public searched for signs they might have missed in their own lives. 2 months after sentencing, Daniel made a request. He wanted to speak. Not to the police. To a journalist. Detective Bennett advised against it, but the court approved the interview under strict supervision. Daniel sat across from the reporter in a small room inside the prison. "You had a normal life," the journalist said. "Why risk it?" Daniel considered the question. "Normal isn't peaceful," he said. "Control is." The answer sent chills through everyone who later read the transcript. During a routine evidence audit, something surfaced that had been overlooked. Daniel's notebooks didn't just document the crimes. They forecasted them. Dates written months in advance. Names replaced with initials. Plans revised and refined. Daniel hadn't been reacting to stress. He had been scheduling relief. Detective Bennett closed the file slowly. "This was never about losing control," she said. "It was about maintaining it." Emily moved out of Willow Creek. She sold the house. Changed her name. Started over. In an interview years later, she said one sentence that defined everything. "The scariest part wasn't that he was evil," she said. "It's that he never looked like it." The sentence closed the legal chapter. But the story refused to end. Because even behind bars, Daniel Harper remained exactly what he had always been. A man who lived a normal life. Until the moment his hidden secret became impossible to ignore. When the cameras left Willow Creek, the town felt hollow. Lawns were still trimmed. Lights still turned on at dusk. Children still waited for school buses at the same corners. But something fundamental had changed. People locked their doors now. They questioned politeness. They questioned familiarity. They questioned how well anyone could ever truly know another person. Daniel Harper's house sat empty, its windows dark. The home that once symbolized stability now felt contaminated by memory. Most detectives moved on after sentencing. Laura Bennett didn't. Something about the case still bothered her, not the evidence, not the verdict, but the orderliness of it all. Daniel had planned meticulously, documented obsessively, and confessed selectively. Yet there were gaps. Too many gaps. She requested access to Daniel's personal journals again. Not the notebooks cataloging dates and sites, but the ones marked simply Reflections. They had been dismissed earlier as philosophical ramblings. Bennett read them slowly. And froze. Each journal entry ended with a number. At first glance, they seemed meaningless, random digits, sometimes increasing, sometimes decreasing. But when Bennett lined them up chronologically, a pattern emerged. They weren't random. They were counts. And the total didn't match the number of known victims. Bennett felt her pulse quicken. Bennett returned to the prison. Daniel looked thinner now. Paler. But calm. "You like patterns," Bennett said, sitting across from him. Daniel smiled faintly. "They bring clarity." "These numbers," she said, sliding photocopies across the table. "What do they represent?" Daniel glanced at them, then leaned back. "You already know," he said. Her voice hardened. "How many, Daniel?" He tilted his head. "How many what? How many women never made it into your system?" For the first time since sentencing, Daniel laughed. Softly. "You assumed I stopped when things got complicated," he said. "That was your mistake." Bennett reopened cold cases nationwide. Disappearances once labeled as runaways. Accidents. Unsolved missing adults. The similarities were subtle, but unmistakable. Same demographic. Same vanishing pattern. Same calm before silence. Daniel hadn't been confined to 2 states. He had traveled. Carefully. Months later, Detective Bennett received a letter. Handwritten. Neat. "You were right to keep looking. Order matters. Completion matters. Some stories don't want to end. No names. No locations. Just enough to reopen wounds." The letter was postmarked from the prison mailroom. New task forces formed quietly. Families were contacted. Some cried. Some screamed. Some finally understood why hope had always felt so fragile. Not every case could be proven. But the shadow Daniel Harper cast grew longer. Emily read about the new developments years later, from another city, under another name. She closed the article and stared out a window. "He never finished," she whispered. It was the realization that haunted her most. In prison, Daniel stopped speaking to everyone. No interviews. No letters. No explanations. He had said enough. And he knew something no one else did. Some secrets would never be found. The case of Daniel Harper was officially closed. Unofficially, it had expanded beyond anything anyone imagined. Because the most terrifying truth wasn't that he had been caught. It was that he had decided when to stop telling the truth. Daniel Harper remained exactly where the court had sent him, locked inside concrete walls, stripped of routine, stripped of choice, stripped of the normal life he had spent decades perfecting. And yet, the case never truly ended. It lingered in files, in town meetings, in whispered conversations between neighbors who still lived in Willow Creek. It lived in police training seminars. In psychology textbooks. In every warning about how danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it blends in. 5 years after Daniel's conviction, a construction crew broke ground on a stretch of land just outside a neighboring county. The project had stalled multiple times, funding issues, zoning delays, legal disputes. No one expected anything more than dirt and concrete. Instead, they found bone. The remains were partial. Time had erased much of what could have spoken clearly. But one thing survived. A small metal clasp. Identical to one described in Daniel Harper's notebooks. The discovery didn't make headlines right away. Authorities worked quietly, cautiously. DNA testing took months. When confirmation came, Detective Laura Bennett was the first to be notified. She sat alone in her office long after sunset, staring at the report. The count had increased. Again. Bennett visited Daniel one last time. He had aged. Gray threaded through his hair. His posture had softened, but his eyes were the same, alert, observant, calculating. "You didn't tell us about this one," Bennett said, placing the file on the table. Daniel glanced at it briefly. "I told you what you asked," he replied. "You let families grieve without answers." Daniel leaned back. "Grief doesn't require answers. It requires hope. You gave them that." Bennett felt a familiar anger rise, but beneath it, something colder. "Why keep secrets now?" she asked. "You've already lost everything." Daniel smiled faintly. "No," he said. "I kept one thing." Bennett waited. "Control," Daniel finished. The Harper case altered how missing person investigations were handled nationwide. Patterns once dismissed as coincidence were scrutinized. Behavioral profiling expanded beyond rage and impulse. Training manuals added a new category: individuals who offend not from chaos, but from order. Investigators were taught a hard truth. The most dangerous person in the room is often the calmest one. Daniel Harper became a case study, not because he was unique, but because he wasn't. Emily Harper never returned to Willow Creek. She built a new life far from cameras and courtrooms. She worked quietly. She avoided interviews. She carried no reminders of her former name. Once a year, on the same date, she visited a small memorial garden dedicated to victims of violent crime. She never stayed long. "I don't visit him," she once said to a counselor. "I visit the version of myself that survived." Daniel Harper died in prison 17 years after his sentencing. No confession. No final statement. No list of names. Just silence. Officials searched his cell thoroughly. Nothing hidden. Nothing left behind. But among his personal effects, they found a single folded piece of paper. No message. Just a number. One higher than anyone expected. Years later, when Detective Bennett was asked about the case in her retirement interview, she paused for a long time before answering. "We caught him," she said. "We stopped him." Then she added, quietly, "But I don't think we ever truly knew him." The interviewer asked what haunted her most. Bennett didn't hesitate. "He wasn't afraid of being discovered," she said. "He was afraid of being misunderstood." Willow Creek is still quiet. Still suburban. Still ordinary. But no one there believes normal means safe anymore. They teach their children that trust is earned slowly. That politeness is not proof. That familiarity can be manufactured. And every so often, when a neighbor waves a little too perfectly, someone remembers Daniel Harper. The man who lived a normal life. The man no one questioned. The man who proved, once and for all, that the most horrifying secrets don't hide in darkness. They hide in plain sight. Daniel Harper's story ends where it began. Not with violence. Not with rage. But with routine. A reminder that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like a husband. A coworker. A neighbor. Someone you think you know. And that is why this case will never truly be closed. Because the most dangerous secrets are the ones that live unnoticed, until it's far too late.